The crystalline announcement tubes flickered to life across the assembly arena, casting prismatic hues over the thousand-species crowd. Jax Corbin watched the holographic display materialize above the starting line, its quantum particles arranging themselves into the infamous words that had marked the beginning of countless tragedies. Welcome to Death Track, where probability ends and legends begin. The gathered crowd erupted into a cacophony that transcended language. Clicking mandibles, resonant hums, telepathic surges of emotion washing over the empathic receivers. Jax adjusted his neural dampeners, blocking the worst of the sensory overload. From his position in Bay 17, he could see the other racers making final preparations, some with multiple appendages working in perfect synchronization, others communing with their vessels through biochemical interfaces Jax couldn't begin to comprehend. Death Track wasn't merely a race. It was the universe's most extreme form of entertainment, broadcast across 17 dimensions, 4 temporal frequencies, and countless worlds. An interspecies competition where pilots navigated through a course that existed partially outside conventional reality, a place where the laws of physics became suggestions and probability itself became a tangible force. The ultimate test of skill, courage, and sometimes pure luck. Jax ran his hand along the sleek contours of his ship, the Aurora Wraith. Unlike the biomechanical monstrosities or sentient crystal formations that comprised many of the other vessels, the Wraith was deceptively simple, a human-designed craft modified with technology borrowed, stolen, or reverse-engineered from a dozen different civilizations. Pre-flight checks complete, the ship's AI announced, its voice a perfect recreation of Mira's. Probability shield integrity at 97%. Temporal anchors online. Reality stabilizers functional. Jax winced at the familiar voice. 5 years since the accident, and he still couldn't bring himself to reprogram the AI. His sister's voice was both comfort and torture, a reminder of why he was here. The hovering maintenance drones scattered as Jax climbed into the cockpit. The interior was sparse, a single pilot seat surrounded by control interfaces that responded to touch, thought, and occasionally emotion. A small hollow cube floated in a magnetic field near his right hand, cycling through images of Mira, smiling, laughing, giving that look of exasperated affection she'd perfected during their childhood. The last image showed her in her rescue pilot uniform, standing beside Jax after they'd completed a particularly dangerous extraction from the collapsing mines of Titan. That was before Jax had left the Stellar Rescue Corps, before he'd abandoned their shared mission of saving lives to pursue the adrenaline rush of racing, before the accident that took her life while trying to rescue the victims of a crashed racer, the accident that should have been his responsibility. 10 minutes to race commencement, announced the track controller, a disembodied voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. All pilots, complete final preparations. Across the hangar, a Vortian engineer approached Jax's ship, carrying a transparent case containing what looked like a small silver orb embedded with pulsing blue light, the latest temporal stabilizer, standard safety equipment for all Death Track racers. Pilot Corbin, the Vortian's translator device rendered its clicking speech into standard. Final safety installment. Mandatory. Jax waved the engineer away. Not interested. The Vortian's compound eyes blinked in asynchronous patterns, their species equivalent of shocked disbelief. Stabilizer prevents temporal fragmentation. Without it, probability storms will... I know what they'll do, Jax cut in. That's the point. After a moment of confused hesitation, the Vortian retreated, its exoskeleton clicking nervously. Through the transparent hangar walls, Jax could see the Death Track materializing, a ribbon of warped space-time that twisted through the void like a serpent made of fractured reality. At certain points, the track seemed to fold in on itself, creating loops and spirals that defied Euclidean geometry. Even from this distance, The visual distortion was nauseating to human perception. The final boarding call sounded, and Jax sealed the cockpit. Around him, the other racers' vessels hummed to life, some pulsing with bioluminescence, others emitting fields of energy that bent light around them, and a few that seemed to exist partially out of phase with reality itself. Jax started the ignition sequence, feeling the familiar vibration as the Wraith's engines engaged. His hands moved automatically across the controls, muscle memory taking over as he calibrated the navigation systems and verified the integrity of the ship's probability shielding. Warning, the ship's AI spoke in Mira's voice. Multiple safety systems offline or uninstalled. Probability storm protection at 30% capacity. Temporal anchor disengaged. Racing under these conditions has a calculated survival probability of less than 2%. That's still a chance, Jax murmured, more to himself than the AI. The Wraith's engines reached full power, a high-pitched whine filling the cockpit as the craft lifted from the hangar floor. Through the comm system, Jax could hear the announcer's voice, introducing the racers to the spectators, each species represented by their champions, the best pilots their civilizations had to offer. From the Andromeda Collective, Vorthan, 7-time Deathtrack champion. The crowd's roar intensified as a massive crystalline vessel glided from its hangar, radiating pulses of psychic energy that even Jax's dampeners couldn't completely block. Vorthan was legendary, not just for winning, but for how he won, by psychically assaulting his opponents, forcing them to relive their worst memories as they navigated the already treacherous course. And representing Earth, a newcomer to Deathtrack, Jax Corbin, former Stellar Rescue Corps pilot. The introduction received polite, if muted, applause. Humans were relative newcomers to interstellar competition, and none had ever completed Deathtrack, let alone won. Most species considered human participation a novelty rather than a genuine threat. As the ships moved into their starting positions, aligned in a perfect crescent formation before the mouth of the track, Jax felt the familiar pre-race calm descend over him. The guilt, the grief, the crushing weight of memory, all of it faded, replaced by a singular focus. He was not here to win. He was here for answers. The starting grid illuminated beneath each vessel, a countdown displayed in universal numerals. 5, 4, 3. Jax's hand tightened around the control yoke. 2, 1. The universe seemed to hold its breath. Probability storm forming at coordinate Delta 7. The warning came too late. A panicked voice over the general channel as the sensors detected what should have been impossible. A spontaneous reality distortion forming directly in the race path. In normal circumstances, the track controllers would delay the start, allow the storm to dissipate, or reroute the track. But the grid had already reached zero. Go! 63 ships surged forward into the mouth of Deathtrack. 62 of them veered away from the forming probability storm, a swirling maelstrom of fractured reality that pulsed at the center of the track like an open wound in space-time. One ship, a sleek, silver craft with Earth insignia, accelerated directly toward it. "Pilot Corbin, adjust course immediately." The track controller's voice had lost its ceremonial quality, replaced by genuine alarm. "Collision with probability storm will result in..." Jax cut the communication channel and pushed the Wraith's engines beyond their safety limitations. The ship responded instantly, the acceleration pressing him back into his seat with crushing force. The probability storm loomed before him, its swirling center a kaleidoscope of realities that should never coexist. This was what he'd been waiting for, what he'd calculated might appear. Deathtrack's most lethal phenomenon, where the fabric of reality itself unraveled, where time became malleable, where questions could sometimes find answers. The Wraith plunged into the heart of the storm. Reality fractured. The universe shattered into infinite possibilities, each one screaming for dominance. Jax felt his consciousness split, experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously, versions where he'd never left the rescue corps, where Mara had never died, where he'd been the one to answer that final distress call instead of her. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the fragmentation stopped. The Wraith emerged on the other side of the storm, but the track ahead looked nothing like what had been projected in the pre-race briefings. Instead of the expected series of gravitational slingshots around the binary neutron stars, Jax found himself hurtling through what appeared to be the remnants of a shattered moon, fragments of rock and ice spinning in chaotic patterns. The navigation display flickered, trying to recalibrate to this unexpected section of the course. According to the ship's positioning system, he was simultaneously at the beginning of the race and approaching the halfway point. An impossible contradiction. Warning: temporal displacement detected. The AI's voice, Mara's voice, sounded distorted, stretched. Ship integrity compromised. Probability field failing. Through the viewport, Jax saw the other racers, some ahead, some behind, all of them following the standard course that somehow now ran parallel to this shattered moon section he found himself in. He was racing in a different reality layer, one that existed alongside but separate from the main track. A sudden impact rocked the ship, sending it into a spin. The stabilizers struggled to compensate as Jax fought the controls. Through the viewport, he caught a glimpse of what had hit him. Not debris, but what appeared to be a humanoid figure, tumbling away from the Wraith. Impossibly, the figure seemed to be alive, a slender being with skin that refracted light, like oil on water, creating prismatic patterns across its surface. Most disturbing were its eyes, hundreds of them, covering its body, all blinking independently, all focused on Jax, acting on instinct rather than reason. Jax adjusted the Wraith's course to intercept the tumbling figure. The rescue pilot in him couldn't ignore a life in danger, even in the middle of death track. Using the ship's gravitational tethers, tools designed for navigating asteroid fields, he managed to capture the strange being and draw it toward the emergency airlock. As soon as the outer doors sealed, alarms blared throughout the ship. Warning: unknown entity aboard. Quantum signature unstable. Temporal displacement increasing. Jax activated the internal security feed, watching as the strange being oriented itself in the airlock chamber. Up close, its appearance was even more unsettling. Its form seemed to shift subtly, as if unable to decide on a single shape. The hundreds of eyes blinked in patterns that suggested some form of communication. "Can you understand me?" Jax spoke into the intercom. The being tilted, what might be considered its head. Several eyes closed while others widened. Then, to Jax's surprise, it responded, not in words, but in a series of images that appeared directly in his mind. A shattered vessel, a section of death track that matched where he now found himself, and a sense of time, stretching and compressing like an accordion. "You were racing?" Jax guessed. "Your ship was destroyed in the probability storm?" More images flooded his mind. The being racing the track countless times, across countless years, its body fragmenting, becoming unstuck in time until it existed partially in all moments of the race simultaneously. "You're the keeper of fading stars," Jax whispered. The keeper was a legend among death track racers, supposedly a pilot who had become trapped in the course, existing in all races at once, both competitor and spectator. Most dismissed it as superstition, a story to explain the strange phenomena sometimes reported during races. The being's eyes blinked in a pattern that somehow conveyed affirmation. A new alarm sounded. Proximity warning. Jax returned his attention to piloting just in time to see a massive crystalline ship cutting across his path. Vorthan's vessel, somehow navigating between the reality layers. The psychic assault hit Jax like a physical blow. Images of Mara's final moments, memories he'd never actually witnessed, but had imagined countless times, flooded his mind. her ship breaking apart in Titan's atmosphere. Her final transmission cut short, the recovery team finding only fragments. Jax struggled to maintain control of the Wraith as Vorthan's psychic attack intensified. The ship responded sluggishly, systems flickering as reality itself seemed to waver around them. They were approaching what racers called the memory maze, a section of Death Track where the quantum uncertainty of the course interacted with pilots' consciousness, manifesting their thoughts as physical obstacles. For most racers, with their probability shields and temporal stabilizers, the memory maze was manageable, challenging, but navigable. For Jax, with his systems deliberately compromised, it was potentially lethal. And with Vorthan's psychic assault forcing his most painful memories to the surface, it would be nearly impossible. The first manifestations appeared ahead, spectral recreations of the mining accident on Titan, where Mara had died. The collapsed tunnels, the trapped miners, the debris field that had claimed her ship. All of it now formed a deadly obstacle course that Jax would have to navigate through. Can't focus. Jax fought against Vorthan's continued psychic assault. His vision blurred, hands trembling on the controls as the Wraith drifted dangerously close to a spectral recreation of Mara's shattered vessel. Suddenly, the pressure in his mind eased. The Keeper had moved from the airlock to the cockpit, impossibly, passing through the sealed door as if it were an illusion. Its prismatic form shifted beside him. Several eyes focused on him, while others watched the course ahead. More images appeared in Jax's mind, but these were different, clearer, purposeful. The Keeper was showing him the true path through the memory maze, the reality beneath the illusions. At the same time, Jax felt a strange sense of sharing, as if his consciousness were expanding to include the Keeper's perception of time and space. With this shared awareness, Jax could see beyond Vorthan's illusions. The path through the memory maze clarified, and he guided the Wraith with newfound precision. Spectral debris that had seemed solid moments before passed harmlessly through the ship. They were manifestations of memory and fear, not physical obstacles. Vorthan's ship appeared alongside them, the crystalline structure pulsing with frustrated energy. Through the viewport, Jax could see the alien pilot, a being composed of what looked like living crystal, facets shifting to reveal different expressions, all of them registering shock that his psychic assault had failed. The Keeper's eyes all turned toward Vorthan, and Jax felt a surge of protective energy emanate from the strange being. The crystalline ship shuddered, veering away as if struck by an invisible force. "You're shielding me," Jax realized, the understanding coming as much from the images the Keeper shared as from observation. They burst through the last of the memory maze, emerging into a stretch of track known as Tomorrow's Graveyard, a section where time flowed non-linearly, where the future and past existed simultaneously. Here, racers often reported glimpses of their own deaths, visions of failures and victories that had not yet occurred. For most, these glimpses were fleeting, protected as they were by temporal stabilizers. For Jax, without that protection, and with the Keeper's presence amplifying his temporal sensitivity, the experience was overwhelming. He saw himself crossing the finish line, saw himself dying in a dozen different crashes, saw alternative lives where he'd never become a racer at all. And through it all, he saw Mara, sometimes alive, sometimes dead, sometimes as if she were watching him from beyond some invisible barrier. "Is she here?" Jax asked, voice breaking. "In one of these timelines, is she still alive?" The Keeper's response came not in images, but in a profound sense of sorrow, of possibilities long since collapsed into certainties. Mara was gone in all timelines that still connected to this one. Vorthan's ship reappeared, cutting through the time streams with predatory precision. This time, the psychic attack targeted not just Jax, but the Keeper as well, a complex assault designed to break their connection. Images of the Keeper's own past flooded through their shared consciousness. Its original form before becoming trapped in Death Track. Its countless failed attempts to escape the endless loop of racing. The gradual fragmentation of its being across multiple points in time. Jax felt the Keeper's pain, its loneliness, its desperation. And through that connection, the Keeper experienced Jax's guilt, his grief, his need for answers. Vorthana pressed the advantage, forcing himself into their shared consciousness, creating a three-way psychic link. His purpose became clear. He was using the Keeper's temporal fragmentation to access Jax's memories, seeking the weaknesses that would break him. Pilot Corbin. Vorthan's voice manifested directly in Jax's mind, cold and crystalline. She called for you. You know. In her final moments, I can show you. A new memory formed, but this one felt wrong, manipulated. It showed Mara in her failing ship, calling Jax's name, cursing him for abandoning the rescue corps, for not being there when she needed him. Lies, Jax growled, fighting the false memory. But doubt crept in. He had never heard Mara's final transmission. What if this was true? What if she had died hating him? The Wraith shuddered as Jax's concentration faltered. They were approaching the most dangerous section of tomorrow's graveyard, the probability collapse, where multiple futures converged into a singular present, eliminating all but one possible outcome. She died alone, cursing your name. Vorthan continued, his psychic voice laced with cruel satisfaction. I can show you her last thoughts. They're here, in the time stream. All you have to do is look. The Keeper's form pulsed with urgent energy, its eyes blinking in rapid, alarmed patterns. More images flooded Jax's mind. Warnings. Desperate pleas to resist Vorthan's manipulation. But Jax's resolve was weakening. The question that had driven him to Death Track, what Mara had felt in her final moments, was tantalizingly close to being answered. He needed to know if she had forgiven him, if she had understood why he'd left the Corps, if she had died hating him or loving him still. Show me, he whispered. Vorthan's psychic presence surged triumphantly. The false memory expanded, becoming more detailed, more convincing. Mara's voice, so similar to the AI's recreation, but twisted with hatred, filled Jax's mind. The accusations grew more specific, more painful, drawing on Jax's own deepest fears and insecurities. The Wraith responded to its pilot's emotional state, systems fluctuating as Jax's concentration fractured. They were drifting off course, toward the edges of the probability collapse, where reality itself disintegrated. In that moment of supreme vulnerability, the Keeper made a decision. Instead of merely sharing impressions or isolated memories, it opened its consciousness entirely to Jax, granting him temporary access to its perception of time and space. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Jax's awareness expanded exponentially, stretching across multiple points in time simultaneously. He saw Death Track not as a linear course, but as a complex, four-dimensional structure existing across multiple reality layers. He saw Vorthan's previous victories, the psychic attacks that had driven countless opponents to their deaths. He saw the Keeper's true nature, a being from a civilization that had evolved at the event horizon of a supermassive black hole, where time itself became plastic. And with this expanded awareness came clarity. The false memory Vorthan had constructed shattered, revealed as the manipulation it was. In its place, Jax caught a genuine glimpse of Mara's final moments, focused not on hatred or blame, but on the lives she was trying to save, her consciousness directed outward in her final act of service. The revelation hit Jax with physical force, a sob tearing from his throat as the truth washed away years of uncertainty. She hadn't died thinking of him at all, neither with love nor hate. She had died as she had lived, thinking of others, focused on her mission. The Keeper's consciousness began to withdraw, the strain of such complete sharing clearly taking its toll. Its form flickered, becoming temporarily transparent as it struggled to maintain cohesion. But the damage to Vorthan's strategy was done. Free from the psychic manipulation, Jax's focus returned with renewed intensity. The Wraith responded instantly, systems rebalancing as he adjusted their course through the probability collapse. Vorthan's ship fell behind as Jax navigated with the residual awareness from the Keeper's consciousness, seeing paths and possibilities invisible to normal perception. He understood now why no human had ever completed Death Track. They had been racing with a linear perception of time, in a course that existed non-linearly. They emerged from tomorrow's graveyard into the final stretch, a relatively straightforward section of conventional space leading to the finish line. Behind them, Vorthan's ship struggled to keep pace, the crystalline pilot's psychic attacks now finding no purchase against Jax's shielded mind. "We're going to make it," Jax said, a note of wonder in his voice as he checked the chronometer. Impossibly, despite everything they'd encountered. Less than 30 seconds had passed since the race began. Time dilation within Death Track was extreme, but this was unprecedented. The Keeper's form had stabilized somewhat, though it still flickered occasionally. Its eyes blinked in patterns that conveyed both amazement and caution. Images formed in Jax's mind. The finish line. But with a warning. Crossing it would solidify probability, collapsing all potential futures into a single reality. "What happens to you when we cross?" Jax asked, understanding the implication. The response came in bittersweet impressions. The Keeper existed in multiple points along Death Track simultaneously. Crossing the finish line in this race wouldn't free it from its temporal prison, merely shift its consciousness to other instances of the course, other races, other times. The finish line approached, a shimmering barrier where the manufactured reality of Death Track rejoined normal space. Beyond it, Jax could see the spectator arena, thousands of beings watching in stunned silence as the Wraith approached. A human ship, not only completing Death Track, but doing so in record time. "There's something else, isn't there?" Jax asked, sensing the Keeper was withholding information. "Something about the finish line." More images formed. The unique properties of the reality barrier at the finish line. How it interacted with consciousness. How it sometimes granted a single answer to the question most burning in a racer's mind. One truth from the infinite possibilities of the multiverse. Jax understood immediately. This was why he had come to Death Track, stripped of safety equipment, willing to risk everything. One question answered with cosmic certainty. Had Mara forgiven him? The finish line was seconds away. The Wraith's engines purred as Jax guided it along the final approach. Behind them, Vorthan's ship had fallen hopelessly behind, the 7-time champion defeated. "If I ask about Mara," Jax said softly, "if I use this one chance to know for certain what she felt at the end, what will you ask? You've been trapped here so long. Don't you have questions of your own?" The Keeper's response was immediate. A cascade of images showing its homeworld, its family, whether they still existed or had been lost to the supermassive black hole's gradual expansion. 500 years it had been trapped in Death Track. 500 years without knowing if anything it had once loved still existed. Jax's hands tightened on the controls. The finish line loomed before them, its reality barrier shimmering with potential answers. In that moment, Jax Corbin made a decision that would be discussed by race commentators for decades to come. Instead of focusing his consciousness on the question that had driven him to Death Track, Mara's final feelings, he deliberately emptied his mind of all questions save one: the Keeper's desperate need to know about its home. They crossed the finish line together. Reality solidified with a sensation like a thunderclap. The Wraith shot through the barrier and into normal space, engines screaming as Jax applied emergency braking procedures. The ship skidded to a halt in the center of the arrival arena. Systems, powering down automatically as the race completion protocols engaged. The crowd's reaction was delayed by shock, then erupted into a cacophony that overwhelmed even the neural dampeners. On the massive display screens surrounding the arena, the official time flashed in universal numerals. 30:27 seconds. A new record, obliterating the previous best by over 4 minutes. Inside the cockpit, the keeper's form had become almost fully transparent, its hundreds of eyes dimming as it began to fade from this instance of reality. But before it disappeared entirely, a final series of images formed in Jax's mind. A planet orbiting at safe distance from a contained black hole. A civilization thriving, evolving. The answer the finish line had granted. The keeper's people had survived, had learned to harness the black hole's energy, had remembered their lost explorer in monuments and songs. The relief and joy emanating from the keeper was almost overwhelming. As it faded from view, returning to its eternal race through other instances of Death Track, it left Jax with one final impression. Not an image, but a pure emotion. Gratitude. Jax sat motionless in the cockpit as race officials and media representatives swarmed toward the Wraith. The hollow cube beside him still cycled through images of Mara. But now, instead of pain, Jax felt a quiet acceptance as he watched her smile. He would never know with cosmic certainty what she had felt in her final moments. But perhaps that wasn't what he had really needed. Perhaps the answer had always been in how she had lived, not how she had died. The cockpit opened automatically as the post-race protocols initiated. Standing, Jax emerged into the chaotic celebration of the arrival arena. Representatives from dozens of species pressed forward, held back only by the security fields. Questions were shouted in multiple languages, translators struggling to keep pace. How did you survive without safety equipment? What happened in the probability storm? Is it true you encountered the keeper of fading stars? Ignoring them all, Jax walked with steady purpose toward a section of the arena wall known as the Memorial. Here, racers traditionally inscribed the names of those who had been lost to Death Track, competitors who had failed to complete the course. Taking the ceremonial stylus offered by a track official, Jax approached the wall. But instead of adding a new name to the thousands already there, he traced different letters with careful precision. Mara Corbin, she saved others. It wasn't a death on Death Track, but it was a death in service to those who had fallen victim to the race's dangers. It belonged here as much as any other name. As he completed the final letter, Jax felt something shift within him, not the cosmic certainty he had sought when entering the race, but something perhaps more valuable: acceptance. The grief and guilt that had driven him to such extremes didn't vanish, but they transformed, becoming something he could carry without being crushed beneath their weight. Vorthan's ship limped into the arrival arena, crossing the finish line nearly 10 minutes after the Wraith. The crystalline pilot emerged, facets shifting rapidly in what those familiar with his species recognized as extreme agitation. When his gaze fell on Jax, standing by the memorial wall, the psychic pressure of his hatred was palpable, even through the neural dampeners. But Jax found himself unmoved by the champion's enmity. After experiencing the Keeper's expanded consciousness, after glimpsing the true nature of reality within Death Track, such petty emotions seemed almost irrelevant, limited perspectives unable to see beyond themselves. As the ceremony began, and Jax was officially declared the winner of Death Track, he gazed upward at the starfield, visible through the transparent dome of the arena. Somewhere out there, reality continued to fracture and reform. Somewhere, the Keeper raced eternally through the probability storms of Death Track. And somewhere, perhaps, in some parallel timeline that had split from this one, Mara still lived. But not here. Not in this reality that had now solidified around him. Here, He had choices to make about how to move forward, carrying both his losses and his victories. The prestigious Galactic Racing Commission representative approached, carrying the traditional winner's offering, one wish, within reason, to be granted to the Death Track champion. Pilot Corbin, the representative's translator, rendered its harmonic speech into standard. Your victory is unprecedented. What would you ask of the commission? Jax considered for a moment, the answer forming with unexpected clarity. Reinstate me in the Stellar Rescue Corps, he said. Not as a pilot, but as an instructor. There's something I need to teach them about navigating probability storms. The representative's bioluminescent patterns indicated surprise, but it inclined its upper body in agreement. Granted, though most champions ask for wealth or technology. I've seen enough technology in Death Track to last several lifetimes, Jax replied. And some things are more valuable than wealth. As the crowds continued their celebration and the media representatives clamored for interviews, Jax felt a strange sense of peace descend. He had entered Death Track seeking answers about the past. He had emerged with a direction for the future. And somewhere in the infinite layers of reality that comprised Death Track, a being with hundreds of eyes continued its endless race. But now, with the knowledge that it was not forgotten, that what it had loved endured. A small victory against the crushing weight of time and probability, perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. Jax touched the holocube at his belt, freezing it on an image of Mara smiling. Not goodbye, he thought. Just see you later, in some other probability stream. Then, squaring his shoulders, Jax Corbin, human, Death Track champion, former and future Stellar Rescue Corps member, stepped forward to claim his place in a universe where even the impossible simply required the right perspective to achieve.